just to start with, again, I mentioned that this is a Fashion Revolution kind of workshop, and I just wanted to talk a bit about Fashion Revolution. So Fashion Revolution is basically a global movement of designers, academics, writers, policymakers, brands, retailers, marketers, producers, and fashion lovers, and so on. We believe in a fashion industry that values people, the environment, creativity, and profit in equal measure. We want to unite people and organizations to work together towards radically changing the way our clothes are sourced, produced, and consumed, so that our clothing is made in a safe, clean, and fair way. We believe that collaborating across the whole value chain, from farmer to consumer, is the only way to transform the industry. And our mission is to bring together everyone to make that happen. Fashion Revolution Week is our #WhoMadeMyClothes campaign, which is in April, and it falls on the anniversary of the Rana Plaza factory collapse, which killed 1,138 people and injured many more on April 24th, 2013. That is the day that Fashion Revolution was basically born. If you want some more information about Fashion Revolution, you can go to the website at fashionrevolution.org. I will also share some of these resources after, maybe through an email as well. If you're interested in other free online classes or workshops or seminars, Fashion Revolution is offering lots over the next week. Today kind of launches the week. And Fashion Revolution Scotland in particular, which is what I'm part of, has about 2 or so events a day, which you can find on the Facebook page, Fashion Revolution Scotland. I think that there's just a few people trying to come in, so I might just quickly check. Sorry, I was kind of hoping we wouldn't have to do this, but I don't want people having to wait. No, I'm trying to move. It's in the way of my... Sorry, just give me a second. Just trying to move the actual, there we go, so that I can see the bottom of my screen. Holly, I'm wondering if I should just make you, well, no, I can't share my screen that way. I think what I'll do is maybe just finish the presentation and then let people in for the workshop, just because I'm having some problems getting back to my Zoom. Anyways, I'll come back to this. Okay.
You can stop sharing your screen and then.
Okay. Sorry, everyone, have a bit of patience. There we go. Okay, so we've got 2 more. I think that's probably it. Hello for the 2 of you that just joined. If there's anyone else that's joining, we'll just wait until the presentation's done and I'll let them in after that, but we've let the 2 newcomers in. So just starting my presentation, I'm gonna share my screen again and continue. So, okay. There we go. Okay, so, the last thing as well is I just meant to say that the Glasgow School of Art Sustainability Department has actually funded Fashion Revolution Scotland events this week, including this workshop. So we just wanted to say thank you to them as well. So what does it mean to make clothes without making waste? So making clothes without making waste means to eliminate the fabric waste in the process of making clothes, whether you're making it to wear yourself, for your own brand, or for a company that you work for. It's basically a set of principles that focus on waste prevention, and this is often referred to as zero waste or zero waste design or zero waste fashion design. I actually have a short clip that I want to show you that a friend of mine created, and I'm just having an issue with the gallery being on the bottom of my screen. Sorry, I didn't plan for this. I'm gonna just stop the screen share again and okay, hopefully this is gonna work.
Why zero waste? It's time we woke up to the serious environmental problems being posed by our global clothing and textile industries. Generally speaking, we all buy far too many clothes and often isn't enough room in our homes to store all of it. How many of us have unworn clothing in our wardrobe? Even bags of it in our cupboards and attics. This problem extends to the whole planet, where we are running out of places to dump the millions of tons of unwanted clothes being produced. A big part of the solution is that we buy a lot less clothing in the first place. Another important part of the solution is being explored by a small number of designers who are working towards zero-waste design principles. For example, the piecing together of a combination of simple geometric shapes which use every scrap of the fabric, thus generating much less waste in the process of creating clothes that we will wear, love, and pass on.
So that was actually created by school-age kids, primary school kids, with my friend's company Remode in Scotland, just stop animation. So I thought it was, I haven't used it very often, but I found it the other day and I thought it would be nice to share with you. So I'm just gonna go back to my presentation now. Okay. So what is zero waste design? We talked a bit about that. Obviously, we've looked at the video now, but just to kind of go over it one more time, it equates to eliminating fabric waste through efficiency and things like design thinking, design processes, pattern cutting, which is kind of what we're looking at today, zero waste pattern cutting and pattern development processes. Based on 2015 consumption figures, it's estimated that the fashion and textile industry generates between 55 and 92 million tons of waste every year. It's estimated that 400 billion square meters of fabric was produced globally in the apparel industry in 2015, and 15 or approximately 15% of this was wasted, which equates to 60 billion square meters a year. So this was 2015 statistics or figures, but obviously that's a lot. And zero waste is, I guess, responding to this problem. It has consequences for both the environment and for human health. So we're focusing on restructuring production and distribution systems to reduce or eliminate this waste completely. So this image here is just some historical examples. On the left is some Chinese historical dress, and on the right is, you'll recognize probably, a Japanese kimono. And these are two examples of zero waste in history. So zero waste is not necessarily a new idea. It's something that was used in history, and we've kind of forgotten about it. And people like Holly and others and myself are kind of coming back to look at this and incorporating it into practice to kind of combat some of these issues. So I just wanted to show you a couple contemporary zero waste designers. This is MAJA STABEL, who's a Norwegian fashion designer and illustrator. And she set up her own brand focusing on zero waste. She's also recently started offering zero waste sewing patterns, and she teaches workshops in Norway. These pictures here are from her zero waste collection. And again, if you're interested in her website, it's majastabel.com. Study New York is a fashion label that cuts and sews collections domestically at their studio in New York, using both ethical fabrics and production methods. To minimize waste, they use zero waste cutting techniques in their design processes whenever it's possible, and they're advocates for the use of responsible fabrics and slow fashion. So we're just going to talk about some basic principles for zero waste design. So the starting point, basically for zero waste design is the width of the fabric. So your fabric is your main tool for design exploration. So if you're wanting to create a zero waste pattern, you have to work within the constraints of your fabric width. And we're going to just work with the width of an A4 paper today, but Holly will explain a little bit more about how you can kind of work and kind of conform designs within that width. Number two is that elimination of fabric waste should never be used to justify a compromise on aesthetic, fit, or manufacturing costs, because sometimes a zero waste pattern actually equals more fabric than a conventional fabric, or a conventional pattern, sorry, and that can increase the manufacturing cost as well. So it's just good to be aware of those things. And then three, unlike conventional fashion design, pattern cutting is integral to the actual design process. So In conventional fashion design, often you're creating a sketch and then you're developing your pattern from your sketch. Whereas in zero waste design, you're often starting with your pattern. You might have an idea of the end result, but it's a lot more about the design process within the pattern than it is in actually creating sketches, as in conventional fashion design. Some of the challenges in zero waste design are grading. So sizing the garment up and down can be quite difficult. The aesthetic can sometimes have certain constraints. The fabric constraints, which we've talked about, so the width of the actual fabric. Embracing risk, you know, I found this as well. It's like, particularly if you've done pattern cutting before, you have to kind of, which is the next one, changing mindset. You have to get your head around a different way of working and really just experimenting. And sometimes it doesn't work out, sometimes it does, but you really have to embrace taking risks with things. Working with paper is great because you're obviously not wasting fabric in the same way. You can recycle paper, and that's great. I also I make these little samples. I can't actually see myself at the moment because I'm in the presentation mode, but I think can you all see this? Can you wave in what I'm holding up? Yeah, no. So I think you might have an option to be able to be viewing the presentation and also have a little gallery on the side. You know what, I'll show you these after anyways, just so some of you don't miss seeing them, but what I'm holding is some little samples that I've made with something called Swedish tracing paper, but I will show you them after so you'll get to see them. The other challenge is the current fashion system. I'm going to go into this a little bit more. So the current fashion system basically works within a like linear process. You can see fashion design, fashion manufacturing. We're looking at the kind of fashion designer starting the process with sketching and ideas, and then passing that on to the pattern cutter, which then, you know, passes that off to the sample fabric cutter, and then the sample machinist makes up the garment. Whereas in zero waste fashion design, there's more of a circular process, and everyone's kind of working together. It's more of a holistic process. And so we're kind of looking at changing the industry to a more kind of circular way of thinking. So some of the different approaches to zero waste design, I'm going to just I'll quickly mention them here, and then we're going to go through and look at each one. So we've got conventional garment blocks, abstract shapes and geometry, draping on the dress form, and the zero waste matrix, which is what we're going to use today. I'm going to show you the grid system to create a basic shirt. So this is a conventional garment block. If you've done pattern cutting before, then you might recognize this. If you haven't, that's okay. This is, here is my bodice block for my pattern company. It's just a bodice front and back, like a top. And I use this, this is some of my master's work, to create just a basic A-line dress. So it just shows the development process here. I then just played with the shapes from this block basically and laid them out until I came up with this. This was literally like the first go. This is something that just happened to work out. But the shapes I just found really interlocked with a sleeve. And so this is kind of showing it on the fold, and it just shows the whole pattern. So this makes two dresses, which often you'll find with zero waste pattern cutting that you can actually get more than one garment out. It can be more ideal to work with more than one garment. So this is the back of the dress, the front of the dress, the sleeves, and then the second dress is here with a center front, center back seam. So there's the kind of side front, and then the back, and the neckline there. So the next is, and you know what, I think I added an extra one in here anyway. So existing pattern to zero waste. So this is actually a pattern that I came to Holly with. This is when I first met Holly, it was in 2016. And I was designing a pattern for a sewing magazine, and I wanted to try and make it zero waste. So I hired Holly to try and work on the pattern. This was the pattern that I sent her, the file. And then you can see this is in a software called Clo 3D, which we'll talk a little bit more about, but just Holly, it was Clo 3D, right, that you used. I can't see you, but you can maybe comment. This is Clo 3D, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So this, she was able to take the actual pattern pieces and manipulate it kind of like you would if you were manually pattern cutting in some ways, but she's doing it digitally, so you can kind of see trying to work it out, but it's very difficult to take a pattern, a kind of conventional pattern, and make it zero waste. We did get somewhere. So this was the original concept. It's just, again, a kind of floaty, simple A-line dress with a little Peter Pan collar. And this was the final garment, which, you know, it's got some different design details, obviously, but it's not so far off. But it does change quite a bit. And if you're even lucky to kind of work it out. The one thing I would say, though, is that the sewing magazine wasn't able to use, after all this work, the sewing magazine couldn't use this pattern because the actual pattern was a lot bigger than the conventional pattern, and the paperweight was too heavy to include in the magazine. So even though I did all of this, it wasn't wasn't able to use it. And there is lots of issues within, you know, the industry and trying to yeah, I guess engage industry and using zero waste. So these are the kind of things that like people like Holly, academics and researchers are kind of looking at, introducing new ideas and working with industry on. So the other option is abstract shapes and geometry. And this is a friend of mine, Morag, who I went to school with at GSA, and she yeah, played with shapes and such to come up with these little bag designs, which I think are really lovely. And then draping on a dress form. So this is my friend Noor, who was she was on my master's program. And after Holly actually came during the year that I did my master's and did some workshops with us. And this was Noor playing with kind of zero waste necklines and draping on the dress form. So that's another way that you can work in zero waste. This is the zero waste matrix. So this is something that Holly designed when she was at Massey University in New Zealand, along with a team. I think, Holly, did you design this bit on yourself? Like where in the process were you when you actually designed the grid?
What happened was that I was I was developing a series of garments which could embed the instructions for how to make them into their print. And so I was designing with a textile designer the print and the form simultaneously. And I knew that we wanted to do some workshops with the general public and like students and things. But in trying to work out what the workshops would be, I realized that there was a problem in that each person would bring along a fabric that they wanted to make a t-shirt or a coat out of, and that fabric would be a different width. And so I knew that I would, unless I came up with some way of solving that, I would have to help each individual person to work out how do we adapt this pattern, which is for a specific width of fabric for a particular fabric, to fit the one that they had brought along, and there'd be I wouldn't know in advance what that would be. And so in doing that and trying to solve that sort of conundrum, I just had a bit of a thought in the middle of the night, that maybe if that all of these details, these design details, like where the neckline's placed, where the cut for the sleeve is placed, all that kind of thing, isn't anchored to a set measurement, but it's about its relationship to the fabric width. And so it was that was the starting point for developing this matrix or grid system that could be applied to any fabric to make any of the garments from Make Use.
Great, thanks, Holly. So this grid system is basically what we're going to use today. We're going to just, as I said, use A4 paper and create some folds to create the grid system. So this is another way of working in zero waste. I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about my own practice as well as what I did with my master's collection. So one of the things, apart from, you know, the kind of concepts around zero waste, is I wanted to try and make my collection, which is 4 looks. I think it was maybe 7 or 8 pieces in the end. I wanted to try and make my collection without buying any new fabric. So I previously was quite a fabric hoarder and I had a lot of fabric in my stash, and I've made stuff from secondhand clothes, and I thought maybe I'd try and kind of create my whole collection from this. So this is just showing some of the garments. This is my husband's shirt, my father-in-law's shirt, some things left off from things I've made my son, my husband's trousers, which I then kind of picked apart and created textiles from. So this was, I think, my first semester, first textile that I created. And at this point is when Holly had come to Glasgow and did a zero waste workshop, actually a week of workshops at the Glasgow School of Art, and introduced me to Clo 3D, where I was able to basically take that textile and import that textile along with my zero waste pattern. So obviously my textiles in the background there, and then the lines here are the zero waste pattern. Those were imported into Clo 3D and able to then digitally cut and sew my garment. So again, I could play around with different textiles that I was designing without actually having to cut into my textiles to find out how it would look or how it would work. So I started using Clo, started learning Clo, and started using this process of digital toiling because I was trying not to create waste in my toiling or samples that I was creating as well. One of the other things that is quite interesting that I was able to do through Clo 3D was there's an app that you can get. It's called Natello. I know it's changed quite a bit. I don't know if you can get it for free anymore, but at this point it was for free. And it was an app that allowed me to 3D body scan my models just from my phone, from my iPhone. And so I was trying to look at also inclusive sizing. So my models ranged from size UK about 10 up to about UK 24, 26. So this was my like plus size model. And I got as far as importing her, body scanning and importing it. And then unfortunately, one of the buildings in my school burnt down and I no longer had access to computers. So I had to change at that point, kind of react to the situation where I no longer had the computers that I needed to use Clo. And I actually just went back to developing paper samples, which I'm trying to think is this one here, just to show, you know, how you can simply just work with paper and look at different, well, for me, it was about developing the textiles as well as the zero waste design. So I was able, instead of creating these kind of iterations in Clo, I was able to create them in paper. So this just shows some of my final textiles. So that first one here was in my first semester, and it was just kind of playing with fabric. And then I developed a kind of color story for my collection. And it was also looking at the idea of embedded storytelling. So how I felt about the clothing that I was making, or others might feel about it, knowing that, for example, like this striped shirt was my tutor's shirt he gave to me. This was my mom's when she was a teenager. This shirt was a pattern I developed for a sewing magazine ages ago. That's again a kind of toile I made for a sewing magazine. This is some fabric my grandmother gave me about 15 years ago. So it's just quite nice that there's kind of inherent stories in the textiles as well. And it means that my feelings towards the textile actually changes. And I think that promotes longevity in garments as well. So this was the textile that I created out of these garments. I don't think I've got the red fabric on there. That was just remnants from the fashion workshop at the art school. And what I did is I played with taking basic patchwork and kind of deconstructing and reconstructing it. So like cutting the patchwork up and reassembling it to make it more interesting. And that's where I wanted to obviously work and figure out what was the best textile makeup in the zero waste pattern before actually cutting into my textile. So this is the one that I went with. I'm trying to see, because it made two tops. I don't know if I have the other one in this, but this was one of the front of the dress, one of the dresses anyways, that shows the textile, the full textile. And then you can see, I don't know if it makes sense, but I cut it down the center and then basically put the side seams as the center bit here. And then I think I further played around with it by like cutting it then horizontally and joining it in different ways, and then placed my zero waste pattern over top of it, which those are the two dresses there. So yes, that's me. So yeah, basically I got these two dresses out of that textile. That's just a bit of a closer up of the actual patchwork. And then these are the 3 other garments that I created. So this is the only garments in my collection that are actually made from zero waste pattern. I found that kind of focusing just on zero waste pattern cutting felt a bit restricting, and I wanted to explore other methods of zero waste. So I did end up creating, there was scraps of fabric in creating these garments, but what I've done with those scraps is I've done further textile creations from them. I've made artwork. I've got artwork actually in my bathroom of scraps that I've kind of cut up. And so I kind of went beyond just the zero waste pattern and looked at different ways of using fabric offcuts from non-zero waste patterns, if that makes sense as well. And that's kind of what I did with these garments here. So I'm going to pass it over to Holly now. I'm going to stop screen sharing here. And Holly, I need to make you a host now, but I'm not seeing, oh, here we go. Yeah. Okay, so Holly, you should be able to share your screen now.
I am host. All right, I'm just going to share my screen, and I'm going to just show you some of my work and talk about that. So I've been doing zero waste as a design method and a focus of my research since about 2004. It was actually when I was doing my my master's at Massey University in Wellington, New Zealand, and I've explored lots of different approaches. I started out by just trying to work out what can you do, because there was very little information online. There wasn't really any. There wasn't a book apart from historical, you know, costume books. Often had examples of zero waste garments in them, and through that process, I ended up meeting Timo Rissanen, who I co-wrote the zero waste fashion design book with. But what you can see here is some of my early work. This one is embedding 2 patterns, multiple garments into a single pattern. So the one on the left is a men's suit, jacket and trousers, and so you can probably make out the trousers and collar and jacket body and things. And this one's a men's t-shirt and hoodie embedded into a single pattern. And the reason for doing that was to try and explore this idea of a mixed marker, which they use in industry a lot. Often it's more like different sizes embedded into one pattern, but sometimes it's different garments as well. It's complex because you have to think about multiple garments simultaneously, and if you move this line a little bit, then it impacts on this other garment. You know, it can be quite tricky. This is actually on the left here is my master's, or one of the garments that I did in my master's back in 2004, and it wasn't about zero waste at all. Like, I didn't go into it going, oh, I'm going to do a zero waste collection, because that term didn't exist until 2009. But I wanted to tell a story similar to what Cass was talking about. It was about storytelling and narrative and that kind of thing. So the act of dressing was just a process of storytelling, and I didn't want to lose any of the story, so I didn't cut off anything. So there were 5 garments, and they all came from the same origin and starting point, but made different dresses. I've always been, on the right you can see in a very early piece of my work which uses digital print. So I've always been really interested in technology and its relationship to the creative process, and so the print was engineered to fit the pattern, but also the pattern was derived from the forms in the print. So it was like one didn't leave the other, it was at the same time. And when you kind of sew the garment up, it kind of completes the puzzle and it becomes this wolf face. Also, I've always been really interested in the kind of the origin of ideas. I always struggled with the idea that fashion design was a sketch process that you would draw, you know, from your mind, and I always found that really odd. And so I was always looking for other places that I could kind of start designing from. And in this one, it was for an exhibition in Korea to commemorate the various allies of South Korea when the Korean War was 40 years after the Korean War ended. And so it had a theme of war and peace. So these two pieces each come from the typography using Helvetica font, spelling out war, the word war and the word peace. But when it's made into a garment, it doesn't look like anything. It's not like it's got text on it. It's abstracted because I think I was trying to say something along the lines of it, you know, a sense of peace and sense of, you know, being at war is kind of around us all the time. We don't really see it so much. As I was doing this and when I met Timo, we were like, you know, there's very little information out there if you want to do contemporary design. We knew there were people doing it, but there wasn't like a collection of stuff where you could go and look and learn about this sort of thing. And so we co-curated the Yield exhibition, and it was in Wellington at the Dowse and at the Textile Arts Centre in Brooklyn in New York, 2011, I think. And so we had 13 designers from all over the world. There's Mexican designer, Australians, UK, American, there's a Korean designer, a Malaysian designer. So designers from all over the world and their various interpretations of zero waste. And then we wrote this book, which we're currently working on the second edition for, which will be out next year. The next edition of the book is kind of very similar, but with lots of updated information, particularly to do with technology and use of software and things like that. This is some of the work that is, so this is Make Use, and it was first shown in an exhibition at Object Space, which is a gallery in Auckland in New Zealand. And you can see some of the details of how it's made and things. The motivation for doing this was trying to find a really, really, really simple way of teaching zero waste. So the goal was, can I teach an 8-year-old how to do this? And so that's how simplified it needed to become. And it was really important that it was open source. So if you go to the makeuse.nz website, you can download all these patterns for free and use them however you like, even for commercial purposes. So that it needed to be easy to do, easy to make, even without a sewing machine. So this one here is just the edges are painted with house paint and then hand stitched together. So you don't need to know how to bind edges or use a sewing machine at all. It's all hand done. Some of the garments from it, these are digital print files that you can download and print and make if you wanted to. This dress here is made by a single seam. So there's just one straight stitched seam to make that dress. And its interesting form comes entirely from the relationship between the fabric and the body and the wearer. That's what makes the design interesting. It's not lots of pieces that you put together. It's a very simple kind of thing. And this one here makes 2 pairs of trousers, and again, it's really simple. So a pair of trousers, you only need, for these ones, you only need 3 seams. So you've got one spiraling around each leg, and then a single seam, which is your front and back crotch seam. And this is just before my PhD started 3 years ago, where I was getting more heavily into the use of clo and learning how I can kind of push the use of it. And this one was developed out of Ricard Lindquist, he developed a method called kinetic garment construction, which isn't zero waste inherently, but I'm really interested in creative pattern cutting methods in general, and I know there's a lot that I can learn from other methods and applying it with this holistic way of thinking. And so I draped in real life a kinetic garment construction basic kind of top with sleeves and stuff, like a shell coat, and then photographed it and imported it into Clo 3D, and then I modified the pattern to fill all of the space whilst looking at the 3D avatar next to it to constantly judge, is this fitting how I want, is the aesthetic suitable for the kind of market that I'm after, or, you know, like sort of constantly making this back and forth dialogue between the pattern and the zero waste pattern and the 3D form. And like Cass said earlier, like there's no point in having a zero waste garment if it's ugly and no one wants it, because then it's 100% waste. It's even worse. So I never compromise, you know, between what is needed in terms of the design and its waste. This is my PhD, its current title. So now I'm looking at it from a very systems-based approach, and kind of going right back to the creation of fabric itself. But it started by working with industry. So this is a case study or a field test with a really large international firm. And the kind of the step-by-step process of trying to reduce the waste. Went to their factory in Colombia and worked with their production company to try and work out how to produce these garments and what it meant for design, and looking at all the different systems and interconnections that go on when you're developing a zero waste or a low waste garment, and realize there's so much more that you need to know when you're doing this than a regular design process. The finished outcome, one of them was this top. The idea was that I would make something that already existed zero waste. So make this top zero waste. And so this is what I ended up with, and this is what went into production. The difference in terms of waste between these, so this one had a 22% reduction in waste, and this one had a 2.2% reduction in waste, even though they look aesthetically very similar. The reason for the difference is that once we developed it to the point where it reduced waste by 22%, they then went into their regular linear design process, which didn't think about the waste or anything like that. There was no consideration at all for its efficiency beyond once it left my hands. And of course they went, oh, we want to move this line here, we want to change the seam here, we want to do that, which took it back almost to what it was originally. So it was a very frustrating process. It was actually quite upsetting, but it made me realize that we can't use zero waste as like this drop-in solution. You can't go, here's this fashion system, this linear, you know, greatly dispersed, massively globalized industry. We can't go, oh, I'm going to take zero waste design or zero waste pattern cutting and I'm just going to drop it in and it'll fix a whole bunch of stuff, because it doesn't. It can't. The system is so big and so massive and has so much influence that it will override a lot of those things as it goes through the production process. So it needs to be a way of thinking that encompasses everything. Like it needs to kind of cover all the different parts of the industry, and from material, fabric production, marketing, education in the context of a factory or in the context of a business. It has to encompass everything, and it has to be holistic. So my response to that now is to think about new systems. So if we have a new system production that is zero waste at the outset, so it's designed to be zero waste, what could that look like? It could look like lots of different things. And so my PhD is I'm just proposing one thing that it could look like. And so I'm combining the textile design process and the form design process into a single textile form design process. And it's just a little video of me using flow to design a woven textile that makes a garment. This was one of the first ones that I did. So it's woven as a flat textile, and this one you need to make it, I think you need to do 6 seams to make a fully finished coat. And pockets are woven in, so you don't have to do anything to the pockets except cut them. Flow 3D I find extremely useful, primarily because before I learnt it, I used to have to do everything with paper, and paper doesn't behave like fabric unless your paper is like super soft or your fabric is really stiff. So I find it really useful, and it's just a good skill to have as well in general. Get stuck, yeah. Oh, this is a t-shirt being woven and then cut. So this one was before I developed new methods of making garments without sewing. So in the more recent work, I've eliminated the sewing process almost entirely from the production of garments. It just gets woven and cut, and then it's the garment. This one had to have quite a bit of sewing in it, but it makes a t-shirt woven in 3 layers. Like that. And then it's me wearing a t-shirt. The difference in the cut, like the black and the white and the grey, is there because I intentionally chose the yarn to be different colours so you can see the layers. And this is some more recent work, so this one doesn't require any sewing at all. I'm going to be weaving this in a few weeks. And you can change it over its lifetime as well. So it's got kind of like use practice embedded there as well. So that's my thing. I'm going to hand this hosting back to Cass.
Okay.
All right. I think you're a host now, Cass.
Okay. So for the next bit,
you're muted currently, I think.
Oh.
Hello?
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, I can now. Yes, that was my fault.
Great, that's okay. So for the next bit of the workshop, it's going to be a practical demonstration on how to make the zero waste top. And so if you don't have your supplies next to you, just grab your supplies because you're going to need them. So we're going to need an A4 piece of paper, or possibly a couple, but at least one, some sellotape, paper scissors, some pens or a pencil and rubber. I think that's it. If I've missed anything. Oh, a ruler. Helpful to have a ruler as well. I'm just going to share my screen now and set up my phone so that you can see what my hands are doing. Okay. Okay. I know I need to. You're seeing my wall. Hold on. Swap it over. Okay. Can everyone see my hands?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to just make sure that I can see myself as well. Okay. So I've created a grid on my table so that I try and keep the paper in the right spot so that you can see what I'm doing. So I mentioned actually Swedish tracing paper earlier. This is the Swedish tracing paper, and I've made a lot of samples out of this. So this is making a sample. This is the make use top, which actually we're going to make. This is an A4 sample, and this is an A1, if I'm thinking A3, I think, sample. And I've actually stitched it, so it's got like seam allowances, and it behaves a bit more like fabric. If you're in the UK, I have some rolls of this. I do sell it, but I can also give you contacts if you, depending where you are, if you're interested in trying to find it. So if everyone can get their sheet of paper out, I'm gonna actually just see, it'd be helpful if I can see some of you. So give me 2 seconds here. Okay, so can everyone give me like a wave that you can see my hands? Yeah, okay, good. So if you've got a piece of paper in front of you, I'm just gonna grab, oh, my notes still on the ground, hold on. Okay, so what we're gonna do to start with, we're just working with the A4 piece of paper. If we look at it this way, we're gonna work with it where the shorter edges here are basically the selvages of the fabric. You don't need to know necessarily fabric widths or anything like that. Holly's going to go into it with more detail after I'm done demonstrating this. But for now, this would be the selvages of your fabric, and these, the longer edges would be your raw edge. You can write that if you want along your piece. You don't necessarily need to. We'll send you more information about it, but just so you can kind of make sense where the actual width and the length of the fabric are coming from in this. First thing we're going to do is we're just going to fold the paper in half, like so. You should have paper folded in half, and then you're going to fold it these bits in half again, bring them towards the center. So we're basically going to quarter our piece of paper along the landscape version of it. So like that. So you're bringing your edges of your paper towards the center, and then you should have your paper set up into quarters. Okay. I'm just watching a few of you as you're doing this so that I can do it at a good pace and not rush too fast. I'll just give you one more second. Okay, so we've got our quartered paper now. We're going to fold it again in the other orientation now. Okay, so we currently have 1, 2, 3, 4 folds. And then one more time again, but this time we're only going to fold the half this side. So we're not folding both, we're just folding the one side, so that the piece should be like that. I'm going to turn it around this way actually, because this will be the top of the garment. This will be the hem. Okay. Can you give me a wave if I'm at an okay spot to go on to the next bit? Is everyone okay with that? Yeah? Okay, perfect. So what I find helpful to do at this point is to just mark out your line so that you can actually create a visible grid rather than just the fold. So whether you've got a pencil or a pen, I'm just going to use a pen so you guys can see clearer, but just follow the folded lines and draw in your grid. Okay, I'll give you another bit of time to do that, but just so you can see here what the grid looks like when you've drawn it in. Okay. Let's see if you people still drawing and take a drink of water while you're doing that. Okay, so we've got our grid system, and what we want to do is mark basically 3 intersection points that are really important for the pattern. So we've got one here. So this is, again, these are actually kind of the sleeves and the neckline area of the garment, the upper portion, and this is the lower portion here of the pattern. So this is going to be the kind of neckline shoulder area. You don't necessarily need to mark that on now. We'll send you patterns after that have all this information on it. And then we're going to mark these 2 intersections here, which are the armhole intersections and also kind of the quarter segment. So those are the 3 main points that we need for the pattern to kind of make sense. The next thing we're going to do is we are going to add the neckline. Now the nice thing about this kind of system, this make-you system that Holly developed, is that you can put different necklines on. There's lots of different shapes and sizes of necklines that do different things. We're going to just stick to a simple curved neckline. If we have time, we'll show you one more, but we'll send you lots of templates and stuff as well. So along here, You don't necessarily need to follow measurements. I'm just going to do it because I've got it in my head, but you can wait till I'm done and then just kind of generally draw the shape. It's up to you. What I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a line about 0.5 centimeter up from that neckline intersection. So if you're looking at it here, about 0.5 centimeter up, I'm going to draw a line that goes 2 centimeters this way and 2 centimeters that way. So I'll draw it and then I'll show you. Just like that. And that is the back of the neckline there. It doesn't really matter if it's not exact, doesn't matter at all. And then we want to mark a line that's about 3 centimeters or so down. Again, doesn't have to be exact, but about 3 centimeters down that center front line there. Okay. Next, we're going to draw a curve to finish off the neckline. You only really need to do this on one side because we're going to fold the paper in half to cut it. If you want to draw it on both sides, it's fine, but I'll just make sure I'm in my grid area here. Draw it in by hand, like that. So something like that. That's what the neckline is going to look like on this top. So if you want to mark this, you can, but I'm just going to mark this and show you just to show you where our actual cut lines are going to be. There's actually one more step we're going to do as well before we start cutting, but this line here and this line here are going to be our only cut lines apart from what the body rotation we're going to do, which we'll get to. So I'm just going to kind of just show you, mark. You can see there in the red, those are going to be our cut lines. Now, there's a few different things that you can do with this pattern to make it more interesting and to create a different profile silhouette or change the shape. We're going to just stick to 2 today. Well, the 2 main ones, which is a body rotation and a swap. I'm going to show you the line for the body rotation to start with, and then once we kind of assemble it, I'll show you how to do the swap. So again, it doesn't need to be exact, but if you draw kind of 3 little notches, getting smaller along like that, we're going to just draw a shape like a curve like this, which is going to allow us to do, it's called a body or volume rotation in the pattern. I'll give you a second to do that. You can grab your paper scissors if you've got that drawn in. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to cut. We need some tape, and hard to see where these, I can't see them. You can see a few people are still working, so I'll just give you another moment. I'm just going to check and see people are doing great. Okay. So what we're going to do now is, oh, sorry, I'm getting something on my phone coming up. Is cut along these lines that I mentioned. So take your scissors and cut to the middle of that intersection point, but not past it. And the other one. Okay, we should now have something like that for paper cut. Okay, I'm gonna flip it towards the back, and actually, hold on, before we do that, I almost missed a step. We're gonna fold the paper in half again. And we're gonna cut along the neckline, but we're not gonna cut out the neckline again, because this is zero waste, and we wanna keep the neckline as part of the garment. So I'm actually gonna cut from this side. We're gonna cut along the curve, but not along the back neck edge, which is a straight line. So you're just cutting that curve. I'll open it up and I'll show you. Like that. You can do that by folding it in half, cutting along that line, and then you've got your neckline.
If you do cut it out, you can use it like as a pocket, like a chest pocket or something like that. The easiest thing to do is to just use it as a back neck facing.
Like that. So obviously you're going to have a raw edge along the neckline, and you can use there's lots of different ways of finishing it. I tend to just use a bias binding, and I have a method for creating bias binding from a rectangle or square, which I often use, you know, to make it kind of more waste reducing, because creating bias binding, particularly on, you're doing that on the bias, and it can take up a lot of fabric if you're just cutting like one strip of bias binding. So I'll maybe include a link on, if you're interested, on creating binding from like a rectangular square when I send you a follow-up email. So we've got the neckline now cut out. You can fold it back like that, and we're going to flip towards the back here. Oh, sorry, my sister's calling from Canada. I didn't expect it. Okay, so what we're going to do, I'm just going to ignore that call as long as it's not in the way of my, what we're going to do is fold that back like this. I'm sure there's probably a way to have turned all of that off. My apologies. We're going to bring that together, and we're going to take this center back line like that. So we basically created our first tube, which is going to go around our bodice. You can now see it's becoming a garment. We've got our neckline, we've got our kind of front body, back, and then you can now see that these are becoming sleeves. So quite exciting when it actually comes together as a little garment. So what we're going to do now to tape the rest of it is just tape the back. Again, you can line up your center back seam. Oh, I'm just going to shift it over so you can see it better. So I'm going to tape it all the way up to the armhole, those intersection points, like that. Again, now the kind of full shirt is together, and the sleeves, I find the easiest way to tape them is just kind of stick the tape and wrap it around, and then I can kind of get in and open them out. Okay, so that is a zero waste shirt. So now I'm going to show you, like I said, a body rotation, just create some volume to change kind of the proportions, and this is something that you can do in lots of different places on the garment. You can do it along the sleeve. Holly will kind of go into it in more detail, but if you've got that kind of main shirt together now, you're going to just flip to the back here, and you're just going to cut. You may or may not have taped this little bit at the back, but you're just going to cut up to that line there, and then you're going to cut around so my line's red here, and I'm going to cut all the way around and cut it right off. Maybe left with a piece like this. So that's the front here. Oh, sorry. That's the front. And then these pieces are the back of the garment. We're going to bring those together, and we're going to tape them back together. What you don't want to do is you don't want to overlap them to tape them, because we need this piece to be the same length as this piece. I mean, you could maybe overlap them, and then you'd have to pleat, or you'd have to take this volume and suppress it to fit this. But for this demonstration, we're just going to try and bring these pieces together. Tape that back together. Like that. So we've got that cube now. Now this is the way it was originally sitting on the garment. What we're going to do is we're going to rotate it 180 degrees, and we're going to tape it back on. So we're going to now be matching out what was the center back with the center front, and we're going to tape. I have been checking a bit of the chat. I haven't really been able to respond to it as we've been doing the presentation, but we will look at your questions as well during the Q&A and make sure that we kind of answer if you've been stuck or you have questions that you put in the chat as you've gone along. So I've matched up the center back to the center front and opposite there. And then we're gonna just tape at the side seam on both side seams. You can fill in tape if you want all the way around. I'll probably just leave it like this and kind of get the idea. So now how kind of deep or shallow, you know, you make this curve will determine the kind of shape that you get, like the profile silhouette. You can see there, you know, we've created a bit of a kick in towards the legs, I guess, at the bottom of the shirt, and it kind of kicks out at the front. And so if you think about doing that on your sleeve, you know, you can create a space at your elbow so that the line or the shape of the shirt follows the kick of your elbow as well. And you can kind of mix that around and play with this idea in different ways to create different shapes within your garment. One more thing I'm going to show you before I pass you back to Holly. We're going to do what's called a swap, where we're going to, again, draw a shape onto here, cut it out, and we're going to swap pieces, which allows us to change kind of widths. So what I'm going to do is draw a similar line to the one we drew for the body rotation. So I'm going to give myself a bit of a line to follow, and then now one of the things that's important about how you draw your line is that you want these points here and these points here to be at 90 degrees or right angle, because otherwise you'll just end up with a point at the end of where the place where you need to kind of where you don't want to point. Basically, it won't kind of fit into the pattern properly. Holly, I don't know if you can explain that any better. But
yeah, like it's if it's not at a right angle, then you're going to have like a V shape hem. Whereas if you curve it so that it ends at a right angle relative to the selvage, for example, then or whatever line it intersects with, then it's going to finish much more nicely in the circumference of the hem or wherever it is that you're moving it from or to.
Right, thank you. So what we're going to do with this is, again, we're going to cut along, I'm going to cut along my red line. And then I'm going to cut along, and you may or may not end up cutting a bit of your neckline off. It's not a big deal if you do. And then I'm going to cut along this straight line that we originally taped up. Okay, so now I've cut away this piece, and now I'm trying to remember, can you actually just swap it like that? No, you have to cut it in half, Holly, don't you? So so with the paper, it doesn't really matter which way you have the paper up and down, because you don't have like a right side or a wrong side to your fabric. Whereas if this was fabric, you know, you wouldn't be able to just flip that around that way necessarily, because you'd have, unless you wanted to, maybe you'd want to, but you'd have the right side and the wrong side of the fabric together. So if that was the case, then you'd want to do it. Is that right, Holly? Like that? This always messes with my head slightly. I sometimes have to make a couple to remind myself. It'd be like that. Yeah, I'm not hearing Holly. That's okay.
Put it back where it was, where you cut it.
Yeah.
Yep, and just move it directly across. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Oh, hang on. No, that's wrong.
I was gonna say, because we want to narrow. We want to.
I just realised what's happened. The cut that you did goes opposite angle, so you're going to widen your sleeves.
Other way, because I was looking at it this way. I think I was looking at but it's actually like this, upside down. That doesn't work, right?
Well, it does. All it's going to do though is it's going to widen your sleeve at the hem, so it's going to be like a flared sleeve rather than a narrowing of the sleeve. So it works. There's no reason why it doesn't work. The cool thing about the swap is that you can use it to manipulate shape and form and volume in any direction. So you can make it something narrower or wider. It's just a matter of taking volume from one place, removing it from there, and then placing it somewhere else. And so what Cass has got is it's widening the sleeve. If the curve had been in the opposite direction, it would narrow the sleeve.
Yeah.
That's the process.
I think that's why I was confused. Drew it on the wrong way. So I'm gonna just tape this back in now. I've swapped the positions. When I was originally like learning this kind of didn't make any sense to me, and it definitely took me like making it up quite a few times to just wrap my head around it. So if it's not making sense to you, don't worry. Just encourage you to kind of practice and play with the grid and play with both swapping and rotation, and you know, you get it over time and to take risks. Okay, so I've taped that back on now, and now I'm going to tape it back to the back here, which can be a little bit trickier than obviously when they're straight lines. Yeah, so you can see that the sleeve is getting much wider at the hem. Okay. Almost there.
All of the rotation and the swapping methods are just like basic foundational ways of approaching shape manipulation. So you can place them like the sleeve, it's going across from salvage to salvage. That swapping process goes across the body down the length of the arms. But you could do it down the length of the body, and so you could taper something in at the waist and out over the hip. So it's just a way of manipulating shape and form.
So now we've got sleeves. You can see if I kind of hold it there that they're a bit wider at this point. I think I've got one that I have. Let me see if I've got a sample of that one. Again, I played with it. You've got a bit of an odd shape at the back there, but slightly smaller hem at the sleeve. So again, just a matter of playing and playing and playing. Yeah, that's my bit of the practical demonstration. I am going to now just hand you back to get a view of my tattoo. Let me stop screen sharing. Okay. Holly, for some reason it's not letting, oh, there we, sorry, 2 seconds, slight technical. Oh yeah, no you are host right now, right. Okay, so everyone should be able to see Holly's screen now. Oh, I have to,
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. Sorry.
That's okay. Okay, so that t-shirt shirt that you just made comes from a pattern that is very, very, very old. It's like Danish age old is the oldest one that I know of, but there are lots and lots of examples of that kind of approach to making a garment from history. Researchers think that it comes out of the way that an animal hide is shaped, and the most efficient way of turning that animal skin into a garment was to use this kind of method. And it has a very different relationship to pattern or like garment pattern than what we're used to. So there's no like side seam, there's no armhole seam, there's no underarm seam, there's no shoulder seam. It's one piece that is wrapped and stitched together around the body. So it's a very different way of thinking about how to dress a human. And the method that MAJA uses in terms of turning that basic kind of pattern into a grid that you can apply to different fabrics and things like that can be made as simple or as complex as you like. So that t-shirt that Cass just showed you is the very first one where you just cut the two lines in from the side and a neckline and then folded it and made it into a garment. That's as simple as it gets. There are so many different variables that you could develop from that. And all the workshops that I've taught, where I've taught that method, it's never the same thing twice. There's always like so many different people have loads of different interpretations of it. So it's only limited by your imagination. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through a few of the basic things about how can you possibly change it so that if you wanted to make this into a coat, for example, what would you do? If you, what happens if you change the fabric width? What does that do? If you want to change the length of the sleeve, how do you do that? If you want to add a collar, how do you do that? So what I've got here is you can see the Make Use grid, which is basically the t-shirt you just did, but a longer version. So this one makes like a long t-shirt dress. The only difference is that it's longer through here. So the distance from here to here is longer than the one that you did. Everything else is basically exactly the same. The width of the t-shirt, so this width is based off the fabric width, and the t-shirt that this pattern originally was for was made of an organza fabric, which was like 130 centimeters wide. So that's this distance here. And the t-shirt, the Make Use t-shirt, the original one was 115 or 110 centimeters wide. So it was much narrower. The other thing is that it was 80 centimeters from here to here, whereas this t-shirt was like 140 centimeters long. And so not changing the basic pattern at all, but just changing the scale of the fabric that you use can dramatically change the expression of that garment. So there's lots of just things that you can do in terms of what fabric you use. If it's a stiff fabric or a very fluid fabric or a transparent fabric, or how wide it is, how long it is, all that kind of thing. Even if you change nothing else, that would change a lot. And the method that Cass showed you, where you're folding the paper in half, it's about fractions. So it's about relative measurements, not absolute measurements. So it's not like it needs to be 50 centimeters from here to here. It's that it's half the width of the fabric. So that means you can apply it to anything. But then, you know, what if you have a piece of fabric that you really love that you want to make a coat out of, but if you just use the full width as your circumference, it's too wide, or maybe it's not wide enough, and so you need to change it to fit a body. There's a few different ways that you can do it. For example, if you have a piece of fabric, my screen has stopped sharing. I'm going to have to reshare. Sorry about that. So if you have a piece of fabric that is this wide and this full width is like 160 centimeters, if you put that around your body, it's quite large. And if you are a small person, then it's probably going to be kind of drowning you in fabric. And so if you use that basic grid method and you divide this into 4, and then you decide where you want the sleeve to go, so here's your grid that you marked out with folds, and then you cut up here, and then this is your center front, then this is the full circumference all the way around your body. And the problem with that is that if you are only, I don't know, 100 centimeters at your widest point, then that's going to be massive relative to you. And so you need to be able to make it smaller. And the way that you do that is, I'm just going to change my color, is that you basically, these points here, so here's your neckline, here's your underarm, and here's your other underarm. You need to move these points in, because this section here, that's your front, and your side seam originally was here, but it's now here. So if you move those points in, you're going to make it narrower. But the problem then becomes, as with zero waste, this is always the case, if you take something out, like you're taking out some measurement, then what you've got now is this here sews to here. And so they need to be the same length. So they're both, say, X. And then this bit here, from there to there, needs to somehow fit into here. And this does not equal that. So what you need to do is you need to either like gather or pleat this so that it fits into that section, or you need to cut off a section. So this green bit, if you cut that off, then this can sew into the back again, but then you have a piece of waste. In fact, you have 2 of them because you have 1 on the side as well. So it's a matter of working out, if I make this change, what impact does it have? What is the flow-on effect from making this change to the pattern? And how do I deal with the kind of, the flow, this result from making these changes? And so lots of people will do things like, well, it's a coat, I need pockets. So they'll think about dividing that up and making pockets. Maybe, so here's your pocket bag front and pocket bag on so the 2 sides of your pocket bag, and here's your welt or your facing for that. You might want to take the piece and divide it in 2 and use it to finish the edges of hems or a collar, that kind of thing. Yeah, there's lots of different things that you can do. So the other thing that can happen is that you'll notice with the little paper thing that you made that it's quite flat, like it's like a 2-dimensional garment. It would lay almost completely flat, and the body isn't. And so because the basic t-shirt or the basic garment is flat, it needs to be relatively big compared to the body. Otherwise, like it gets really tight in the underarm and it puts a lot of stress on the join that happens right there. But you can add three-dimensionality to this pattern. And the way that you do that is, so if you have your fabric, then you have your grid. If you take out that section through there, then this will join to this, and it basically becomes like a side body and an undersleeve. So you end up with depth, three-dimensionality to the garment. So that's one way that you can add like three-dimensionality, and how deep that is up to you, and what shape it is up to you. But this pink bit here is now a waist. So you have to, again, you have to think about, what do I do with that? Do I need to finish this garment somehow? Do I need it for details, or, you know, what is it that I need? And then one last thing I was going to show you is that, how do you make it into a coat? How do you do like a collar? So I'm going to imagine you've got your grid, and then there's where your neckline goes, there's your armholes sort of area there. And if we zoom in just on this bit where the neckline is, to make like a coat collar, like a stand collar, you make this sort of sideways E shape, and then you cut along the green line and you join those two little blue triangles together, and it changes the rotation of the fabric from being this plane to this one, and it goes around the back of your neck. Now Cass can show you that in her demo. I think you're going to do that.
I think we're ready. Do I have to hit my space bar, or can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay. I think we're right at 2:30. I've got the, like, I can kind of quickly demo it, but I'll maybe just show you what to do, and then we can go into the Q&A, because it's, I say 2:30, it's 3:30 our time here now. So was there anything else you wanted to show, Holly?
No, I think I'm good. I'm sure people have questions, so.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'll just quickly show you. I'm not going to go back to my phone screen, but you can see my setup here. This is the shape that Holly's just drawn out for you. And what you do to join the back neckline is that you're just going to cut along this line here. I'm going to try and do this and actually see. So again, this is just another grid. So this is folded in half, and so I've kind of created quarters again, and then that's folded in half, and that's folded in half to kind of find that line for the grid, if that makes sense. So there are templates that you can download on the Make Use website for all the necklines, for all the different necklines. There's like kind of boat neck, the collar, the rounded necklines, different kind of depths. You can make up your own. So what I'm doing is so I've cut down the center front here, and I'm gonna follow around. So the other side. Okay, so now I've got a piece like this. What I'm going to do is I'm going to join these together, right? So that was originally here and here, and I'm going to tape those together. So I'll do that, and then I'll just show you. So I've taped that together, and now this would go around this way. I think this is maybe small for me, but don't know if you can see, you have a bit of an opening at the back of the neckline, which you can fill in if you want, you just leave open. But then you would have just kind of the full, you can see again, the opening of the collar, the little join at the back, and then, you know, you can fold the little lapels back. That's kind of more of a coat version there. Yeah? Okay, so I think we're gonna open it up for questions now.
There's a few questions that I can see on things. So Andrew says that you can add gussets under the arm too, and that's absolutely true. So how I showed you with the adding side body and undersleeve, you can just also add in some gussets. Usually they're diamond shapes, and you can sew them into there. The other thing you can do is you can kind of, when you're constructing it, you can sew that join as like a dart, which reinforces that point. It also gives it a little bit of 3D shaping into the bust. And then Laura asks, what if you're bigger than the fabric width? So if you're bigger than the fabric width than you have, and you like hold it around your body and you're like, it's too tight, it's too restrictive, then what you need to think about is, how do I add in some width into that? And so you might take that from, and what I might do is I'll share this again. I can draw it. So if you have your fabric and you've got your grid, if it's not wide enough, you know, here to fit around your circumference, then you need to use a longer width that you can then insert into this section here. So you're essentially taking this and moving it to here, and that adds in width across the body. There are other ways that you could do it, using like the what do you call it, like using a swap method, where you have a curved line rather than a straight one. If you want a shaped, like a shape over the hip, if you take this section and you have a matching one on the other side, and then you swap them with each other, then you're essentially adding extra width around the hip area. So you can take all of these kind of elements, these kind of basic ideas of rotation, swapping, that kind of thing, and you can either add it just in a simple way, you can just add fabric like this one does to add width, or you can use the swapping methods to add shaped width to it. Depends on how much extra width you need. And you can obviously use darts and gathers and pleats and all that kind of thing as well.
There's a couple questions as well about the presentation. I don't mind sending in, we can kind of join our presentations together and send them to you. Holly, is that okay with you as well?
Yeah,
and we'll send you, as I said, lots of resources and everything. Someone asked as well about the 3D body scanning app. It's called Netello, Netello, Netello. It's an Israeli company. I think they're based in Tel Aviv. And we've done lots of research, and at the moment they seem to be the best option, most kind of affordable. Again, when I started using it, it was free, and I think there's a subscription to it now. But if you have any questions about that, you can let me know.
The program I was using to demonstrate is called Concept. It's just a drawing app on my iPad. And Kat asks, what are some good methods to finish the raw edges that you're joining? So there's a few different ways you can do it. So the basic make use pattern doesn't include seam allowances, but it can include seam allowances. We didn't, in the original versions of it, we didn't include seam allowances because we were aiming to teach people who maybe didn't have access to a sewing machine, or people who'd never sewn before, or didn't understand what a seam allowance even was. And so we used other methods like either pre-finishing the edges. So you mark out your grid on your piece of fabric, and then you can either paint with like house paint directly onto the fabric, wait for it to dry, and that makes the edge, it's like fray stop. You can like buy fray stock from, you know, haberdashery stores and things, but it adds colour as well, which is quite cool. And then when you cut it, it doesn't fray. And then we taught them how to use edge stitching methods, or what are they called? Insertion stitching, which is like an old-fashioned but quite cool-looking method of joining. But if you just put a seam allowance on it, you can sew it like a regular seam. You just need to take that into consideration when you're marking your pattern out, because it does change some things.
Also a question about Swedish tracing paper, which if you're in the UK, there's a UK-based company that I buy it from. I'll maybe have a look and see, depending on where else. If you're not from the UK and you're interested, let me know where you're from, and I can see where it's available from near you. Yeah.
Someone's got a question about bust fullness. So the basic make use t-shirt, if you have a fuller bust, there's a few things that you can do. One of the things that people, when I talk these workshops, find easiest to do is to basically just turn the pattern around. So if you rotate the pattern and you make the sleeve cut with a bit of an angle, then it adds a little bit of fullness across the bust and a little bit of width and depth to the bust. The other thing that you can do is you can add in darts. You just like with regular pattern cutting, you need to know what the largest measurement is, and you can suppress down into the waist, for example, so that it fits around the bust. With those patterns, it's really the three-dimensionality, the depth with a gusset or with the undersleeve side body thing. That's a good place to start if you've got a substantial bust, but then it's a matter of shaping into it. So yeah, darts and those kind of swapping methods so that you can add some good shape.
Someone asked, were you done, Holly?
Yeah, no, I'm good.
Okay. Someone asked about the cost of Clo 3D. If you're an individual, it's $50 American dollars a month for a monthly subscription. If you're a student, it's 50% off that, so $25 a month. Do they still do you know, Holly, do they still do the 30-day free trial? Yeah,
they do.
Yeah, so you can get a free trial as well. Holly and we're both interested in offering further online classes. Holly does teach Clo 3D, so if that's something you're particularly interested in, you can let us know as well, and we can kind of take that into consideration for future workshops.
Catalina asks about costs. Do you think removing fabric waste equals the extra sewing or processes that are more complex zero waste piece involved? In some cases, zero waste garments are simpler, and if they're very, very simple, then there's not usually added sewing time, but the kind of sewing that you do might be different. So it's not as simple as, say, you know, sewing the whole front and the whole back and joining them together. So the processes are different, and so there's like learning requirement there in terms of factory staff or whoever it is that's sewing the thing together. If the piece is really complex, like it's some people when they start doing zero waste, and including myself, I had very, very complex patterns which were multiple more pieces than you would have in a normal version of that garment, and so yes, the cost would be increased. In terms of like kind of balancing out the savings in fabric versus the amount of time it takes to sew, it would depend entirely on the market, the fabric. One of the things that I found in working with companies is that if it's a very cheap fabric, so say it's for a fast fashion company, very, 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 very cheap fabric, it would take a huge amount of reduced use in fabric to justify the increase in even one pattern piece. And so it completely depends on the market and the kind of the values of the company itself. I did a case study with a large fast fashion brand, and we reduced fabric use in an existing style by about 25%, which, you know, in terms of reducing yield, is a huge amount to reduce fabric by, and it required one extra seam. But the cost of sewing that one extra seam outweighed the savings in material costs because the fabric was so cheap, and so they didn't do it. So if they were a really ethical brand, then they might go, it's worth it, even though it's going to cost us a couple of cents extra to do, we're saving so much fabric that it's worth it. But if they are a fast fashion brand where cost is everything, then they're not going to do it. So it totally depends on the brand itself. Have I ever taught zero waste cutting before traditional methods to students? So do you mean teaching zero waste before traditional methods? I often teach people who've never sewn before, who've never pattern cut before. So yes, what I find is that people who have a lot of experience in pattern cutting in a traditional way often have a harder time doing this than people who don't know anything. And that's because depending on the person, they need to sort of unlearn a whole bunch of stuff about how to do this. You know, like how breaking these rules, like grain line is a classic one. You'll notice the grain line on the t-shirt you guys made is all over the place because the t-shirt sleeve and the body is one piece. And so you have, you know, cross grain here and down the length of the grain on the body. And normally the sleeve would be, the grain line would be going down and down. And so for a lot of people who have a very traditional background in sewing and pattern cutting and construction, they're like, but that's against the rules. And so it can be really hard. At the same time, if you go into it with a really open mind and a high degree of flexibility, then bringing the skills that you have already into this way of thinking can be super, super valuable. So it kind of depends on the person. It's not so much about the skills you have, it's more about the way that you think, the way that you see things. What's been my favorite garment I've designed? Well, for me, I don't know. I really like all of the make use garments because they're so simple, and I think they're really beautiful, and I wear them a lot. But at the same time, also really love the work that I'm doing at the moment, where I'm weaving whole garments, which is still zero waste, and I take a lot of the understanding that I have about pattern cutting, both traditional and zero waste, and I bring it into quite a different sort of context. And I find it really, really exciting and fun, and really challenging. So anything that was hard for me to do that I eventually got the hang of, I really appreciate.
For me, I would say it's probably my coat. I think I actually have it here. This is the coat that I designed for my master's collection. And actually, it's not fully zero waste, like cut zero waste, but I kind of built the textile to the shapes of the pattern, if that makes sense. So I tried to reduce the waste by, you know, creating my fabric to the shape of my patterns, basically. This is it. But it's also inspired by my grandpa. And it's got pieces of fabric from like the last probably 15 years of my life in it. So it's got little bits of Harris tweed, and it's got little bits of embroidery as well. And there's lots of like memories in it, and it's massive, and it's never really cold enough in Scotland to wear it because it's quilted as well. It's so heavy, like, to hold, but it probably means the most to me. And it took a really long time to make, so I couldn't measure it, but yeah.
Hilary asked, how long does it take me to fully develop a zero waste pattern in Clothes 3D? It depends. It can take 5 minutes, if that, 2 minutes sometimes, or it can take, you know, half a day, a whole day, a week. It depends entirely on the pattern. I will say though, if you've never used Clothes 3D and you've never used 3D software, it's a bit of a learning curve when you first start, and so a lot of it will seem like it takes a lot longer than it should, because you're learning how to use a tool as well as how to pattern cut using that tool. And Sana says, what is your, oh no, Julia was first. Why did you choose the approach of zero waste pattern cutting over smart textiles such as 3D printing or growing fabric structures such as from mycelium? Well, funny you say that, because smart textiles, I just wrote a journal article about smart textiles in the context of my PhD. So I don't not do smart textiles, and I'm really interested in 3D printing. I guess the reason that I don't tend to research heavily into that area is because 3D printing is inherently zero waste. It doesn't need my help, like it doesn't need my skills. Like what you can make with 3D printing is only limited by the materiality of it. And for me, that's really important. The materiality of a garment is everything to me. How it feels on the body, how it wears, how it falls, the drama or the comfort and all that kind of thing. And for me, 3D printing and mycelium isn't there yet. But and there are loads of people who are working on that and making and developing that and making that work, which I think is fantastic. I don't see zero waste as the solution, the one solution for everything. I think all of these different approaches need to work together and in tandem and parallel to each other, so that we have like a whole multitude of solutions to this huge problem that we have in the industry in terms of waste. So I think there's lots of different answers. I don't think the way I work is better than any other, I just think it's different. I'm really interested in growing garments, and I think the weaving process that I use, you could also turn that into a way to grow garments. So watch this space. It's my starting point. Do I always know what garment I'm making? Sometimes. Usually I do. Usually I go, I'm making a coat, or it's going to be a dress, but I don't always. Sometimes it's just exploration with shape, or it might be a concept, like what happens if I do this, or you know, that kind of thing. So not always. When I started, I just draped with fabric on a dress form and aimed to use all of it. And then I moved into using blocks or basic pattern shapes to develop it from. And so I kind of went through a range of different methods depending on where my skill set was at or what I understood about the process. Laura, I play at weaving. There's lots of parallel with traditional use of hand-woven fabrics and more modern sari weaving usage. Yeah, there really is. Like, there's a very clear link between the rectangular form that we all use if we use cut and sew comes from the reality of weaving, like the X and Y axis of weaving, the warp and the weft it's just kind of like how it works. So so yeah, absolutely. I think there's a very clear relationship between that and pattern cutting of all kinds, but especially zero waste. You need to respect the cloth at its utmost. First point of call is respecting the materials we work with. So any other questions?
One of the things you could maybe talk about, if there's any more questions, I know this is something that I was particularly interested about initially, was pattern grading. I remember when I first contacted you, Holly, that was like one of the big questions with the pattern for the magazine I was trying to do, is like, how am I going to be able to make it fit different people? And so maybe talk a bit about challenges in pattern grading.
Sure. So if you're grading a zero waste garment, you need to have an understanding of what you're going to grade it to, what size range, before you design it. So you can't develop a zero waste pattern and then after the fact go, oh, I'm going to grade this to this size range. You need to know that when you start and embed that somehow at the start. So the easiest way to do that, and the way that in the research that I've done talking to designers and companies that have made zero waste garments, the way that it's done usually is that you have, say, a size range of small, medium and large, or a number equivalent of those sizes, and you put the large and the small next to each other. You design those patterns for those garments side by side. And so the larger garment is takes up more space, and the smaller takes up smaller space. And then you have two mediums next to each other. And so that enables you to kind of nest these different sizes, next to each other, and then you can make a zero waste or a very close to zero waste layout. Other ways that you can do it, that's the most straightforward way to kind of embed grading into it. Other ways that I've done it is to change the way that the construction of the garment happens. So there was an Australian brand years ago called Material Byproduct, who used to use this really interesting sizing method where they digitally printed each garment of whatever size was exactly the same as the next, and the print had like very kind of subtle markings on it where it would overlap more or less depending on whether you wanted a small or a larger size, and that was inherent in the design of it. So it was designed, the print was designed so that it was beautiful regardless of how much you saw or didn't see. It was the whole size range was kind of embedded in there. So that's another way you kind of embed all the different sizes into it, and then it's a matter of construction of how you put it together. The other thing you can do is you can design the most commonly sold size to be zero waste, and then accept waste at various levels for all the other graded sizes. So you can go, you know what, I sell the most of these garments in a medium, and so that's zero waste, but my large and my small will do the best that we can. And if you did that kind of strategy, you just have to be super transparent that they're not all zero waste, and it's just what you have to do. If zero waste pattern design became more common, do you think manufacturers would be willing to weave in different sizes to accommodate fabric manufacturers, different sizes? Yeah, well, that was kind of where my PhD into weaving started, because very naively asked, can you specify width in a knitted fabric? And they laughed at me, and and so that was a really, really big company. Like, I think what would need is a revolution in terms of machinery. The things that we use to weave fabric, the looms themselves would have to be more adaptable. At the moment, they're not very adaptable at all. Like, it's very, very hard to change the width of an industrial loom. I mean, that being said, if you look at like the building industry, they have standardized widths for things. So you can get, plywood, and it's always the same width, regardless of where you are in the world. And I think that kind of standardization could potentially help zero waste, because then you always know how wide the fabric will come in. I mean, but that being said, most coat fabric is wider than like silk fabric, which you might use for a smaller scale garment. So there's this kind of very handy correlation between garment type, the usual kind of fabric you might want, and its width. So so it's quite useful, and if it was all standardized and the same, then that wouldn't be quite so helpful. So,
one of the things, oh, go ahead, sorry.
You go.
You say one of the things I love about like actually creating your textiles as well, like I do a lot of patchwork, is just that I can create my textiles to the size that I want them to be, so that, one of my textiles was like almost 100, for my dresses, like 170 centimeters wide, which is not something that you would normally get. It's a lot wider. And so that's something that's nice about actually building your textile, doing patchwork, is that you can be a bit more flexible than just having to buy stuff from the shop.
Yeah, I think what it comes down to is, like, if you think about the garment, textile garment fashion industry, is that it's built around a few kind of core concepts to do with speed, production volume, globalization, cheap labor, cheap materials. And so we have all of these things working in tandem, which mean that we kind of tailor or guide our kind of assessment of any garment or any design practice or process towards what's cheapest, fastest, you know, that kind of thing. So the kind of skewed relationship that we have with how to develop new ideas or designs in general are very, very much geared towards things that are cheap and fast, which is kind of the problem. So we have this massively distributed industry, which is, you know, in the current context is quite kind of interesting. Like, it's very hard for small companies and small countries or countries without manufacturing capabilities to produce their own stuff. And so we have this very globalized industry, which as soon as you try and change anything, it's such a complex, interconnected jigsaw that it's very hard to actually make holistic change, which is why I'm looking at it from a systems perspective and changing the system itself rather than trying to drop in a solution into a mess that is the fashion industry.
Can maybe take one more question if anyone has one last question, and we'll wrap it up. If there is one more. I'll just say it as well. Oh yeah, there you go. Holly, you can answer that one.
Is Make Use an ongoing project? Yes and no. I still teach Make Use when asked. The website is still live. I was in contact with my my web guy this morning because the homepage went down strangely the other day. But I think it's live and ongoing in the sense that anybody else can do whatever they like with it. It's open source, so it's free for use for anybody to use. As long as you just say where you got it from, you don't need to pay anything for it. So, and if you want, you know, any workshops on it, be in touch. So, yes and no. I mean, I'm always designing things. I was working on developing some like interpretations of the Make Use patterns on Clo the other day, which will be part of a workshop that me and Cass will hopefully deliver sometime in the future. So yes and no. It's at my old work. Like I used to work at Massey University in Wellington, New Zealand, and they kind of they own all of my research from that period of my life. So yeah.
Great. What we're interested in knowing as well is, like, if you have any thoughts on what you might want to learn next, let us know. You can post in the chat, or you can email us. I'm going to send a follow-up email just with resources and presentation, more information, some maybe recommended books and things like that. But if you have any thoughts on what you'd like to learn next, we might do like a follow-on class like this, like next steps from here. We're going to offer this a few more times probably as well. We had a huge waiting list. So you know, if you know people that wanted to be part of a class and couldn't take part, you can let them know that we're planning to run it again. But yeah, just let us know, post in the chat, or as I said, send me an email. The other thing we'd like to do is just send out like a feedback form, just to kind of gain some more information about what you liked or what you think could be improved in the workshop. So probably send you a link through with it may come through with the email, or maybe kind of a little bit later down the line once you've run this a few more times. But I think that's it. I don't know if there's Clo 3D. Yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything else, Holly.
No, I think I'm good.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone. That is exactly 4 o'clock. That's impressive. Hopefully we'll see you again at some point. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thank you.